Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This is Just Let Me Be the new version of me, whatever that looks like. Oftentimes when we're going through a phase of transformation, last week we talked on the pod about how we've been given some of these identities and we're just trying to shed these identities because they've been downloaded into us by other people, whether it be our caretakers or just societal norms, and we're tired of carrying those expectations. But just being tired of it isn't enough. So we can say, I don't want to do that anymore. We can determine that we want to do a new thing and have a vision for that new thing. But oftentimes we fall into those old habits, which can be really frustrating because you've made progress, you felt different, and then somewhere along the way, you find yourself right back into those old mindsets, those old habits, or those old relationships. So we're really going to talk about the psychology of that identity homeostasis, which is the invisible force that pulls us back toward those places that we've been before, and how to finally break into this new norm. You know, I'm going to equate this to eating disorder brain. And I say this often, like just because you are able to change the way that you eat doesn't mean that your thought process that created the eating disorder in the first place just miraculously goes away. So there are times when, and as we know, eating disorders are rooted in something much larger than just wanting to be skinny, but there are times when that perfectionism and that need for control creep back into my mindset, and we'll say things like, well, if you can't control anything else, you can control your food, or if you just didn't eat this way, then you could present yourself as this semblance of perfection. Now, my eating disorder began about 32 years ago. And so you would think that going through the process of healing that and having a different way of behaving would have changed the way that I think, and that after, probably 20 years, I wouldn't go back to those former habits. But the reality is those habits during that time in my not completely constructed brain kept me safe from something. And so when the feelings that created those habits in the first place show up, then the behavior has a tendency to say, well, you remember this habit that you used to do, it worked before, it could probably work now. Now, there are some really good spaces where having a habitual thing that you do show back up is really good for you. So when you're thinking like, I've practiced breath work and I've practiced meditation and I've practiced taking a pause before I go into this anxiety attack, and those behaviors have taught me that can keep me safe over having the anxiety attack in the first place. And because you have repeatedly done that, your body knows it to be true. And so you resort back to those habits. That's what we want to be doing. But sometimes the bad habits of old keep you stuck in those same patterns, and your brain remembers the bad habit because it's been there longer before it remembers the new habit, which is the one that you want to revert to. And so there are some shifts that have to take place, but in order to shift those things, we have to actually understand what's really going on in our brain in the first place. We've talked about this ad litem, but I'm going to say it again. Your brain is going to navigate to familiarity over happiness or over desire. It just does. So the research shows that your brain is designed, like it is actually wired to seek predictability. So much so that it'll fill in gaps that don't exist with stories that you're telling yourself because you need to know what's going on. It needs to be predictable inside of that space. So even unhealthy patterns can feel safe because they're familiar. Something that we've always done, it may not be good for us, but because it's familiar, it feels safe. And so your brain doesn't automatically choose what's best for you or this new thing that you've started doing, this new behavior, this new mindset. It chooses what it knows, and it knows what it's been doing for far longer. especially when you have a traumatic response to something. That immediate response is going to go to an immediate level of care that it knows has worked, even if you no longer want to do that anymore, because it has a longer track record of keeping you safe. Now, the good news is you're not stuck there, but it is important to understand that's why that habit keeps showing back up. It has kept you safe. If you're going through a space where you're just tired of people pleasing, but let's say you're exhausted and you just got home from work and someone calls you and they ask you to do something, because you're tired, because you're run down, because you don't have the strength at that moment to walk through the process of no longer people pleasing, to hold fast to your boundary, you may immediately say yes, because that's what you've done in the past to keep yourself safe. There's nothing wrong with you because you're doing that. In fact, I would say that your brain has done a really good job of creating mechanisms that you could rely on. It's just that now you need to teach it that there's something new it can rely on. It doesn't have to do that thing of old. The second piece of research that we need to kind of understand is that identity homeostasis resists change. So psychologists describe identity homeostasis as the tendency to maintain a consistent self-concept. So this is the person I know that I am. This is the role that I've always played. And so that's what I'm going to continue to do. When new behaviors threaten your identity, then your brain, by instinct, resists that change. It doesn't want to learn something new. It doesn't want to get rid of those habits because the consistency of your self-concept before has said that these things work and keep you safe. So some examples of this might be procrastination. Like, you know that procrastination isn't really serving you. You know it's going to give you anxiety. You know you're going to, feel under pressure. And some of us will even say, I work better under pressure. And that is a coping mechanism that your brain has convinced you of because you are a procrastinator, and we procrastinate because we're afraid of failure, and it's something that we've always known to do. It's a habit that we've formed, and so we just keep doing it. So to set timestamps and do things over time feels very foreign to us, even if we no longer want to be the procrastinator. If we're somebody who self-sabotages, like we don't know how to experience peace, and when something's good, we do something bad to self-sabotage it, then we may do that over time, continue to do that behavior, even if we don't want to do it. I watched a movie this weekend where the guy in the movie, and I'll link it below because I can't for the life of me remember the name of it right now, but the guy in the movie had been taught by his mom, who was an anxious person, to guard his heart to the point of that it was a fault, right? So like he wouldn't even let people in who actually did love him. And he basically started self-sabotaging relationships because of this deep-rooted fear he had that somebody was going to hurt him. And he even knew that he did it. Like he explained it to the girl that he was talking to, like this is what I do in relationship. Like, I know this is, who I am and how I am. And he ultimately ends up doing it to her, even though he really loves the girl. Like I said, I'll link it below because it was actually a really cute movie. Kind of like suspension of belief cute, but it was a cute movie. And so he's frustrated that he keeps doing it, but he literally does it over and over and over again, to the point where you're sitting on the other side of the screen going, dude, come on, you got to get this together. But don't we do that ourselves? It's like we can't stop doing the thing that we're watching ourselves do over and over and over again. And there's psychology behind it. Your brain says you don't know how to function in a peaceful environment. So before somebody can hurt you, before somebody can create the chaos, you're going to create it yourself. Whether that's a good pattern or not, your brain has used it to keep you safe before. Maybe you quit too soon. Maybe you don't have the ability to endure. And maybe all of that has been your tactic to keep yourself safe. Growth is going to feel uncomfortable because it challenges your internal definition of who you are. if this is how you've always been and who you've always been, then changing the behavior is one thing, but getting your brain to believe that it's safe to do so is something completely different. The other thing that we need to realize about the research is that confidence equals or follows evidence. So you can be confident in something and you can be confident in the change in that thing, but there has to be consistent evidence that it is so. Research on self-efficacy done by Albert Bandura, if I could speak it would be great, found that confidence grows through experiences of success. Not just our positive thinking hat. So we try to do that. We're like, I'm going to think positively. You can do this. You can endure this. You're doing great, blah, blah, blah. But when you get into a space where you need to make a decision right now, you need to do something about it right now, it becomes more difficult to rely on those new thought patterns than it does to just go back to the thing that has kept you safe, especially when you're tired, especially when you're worn out, especially when the thing has to be done right now. Our instincts are going to kick in that space. But when we believe that we can make change, which is what self-efficacy is, it comes through experienced success. So if I have been successful in stopping my people pleasing, if taking a pause before I answer somebody's demands on me helps me to not people please, if I do that for long enough, then my brain is starting to build confidence in the fact that I can stop people pleasing and I can do a new habit. So eventually, it will instinctually go toward the pause as opposed to instinctually going toward the people pleasing. And the same thing is true of any transformation that you're trying to make. If you're trying to eat better, if you don't have self-efficacy in that space, meaning that you don't think that eating better is going to change anything or that you can be successful at doing it, then something that could negate that is consistency. If I know that I consistently can eat the right thing, can meal prep, can do what I said I was going to do, then I'm going to build confidence in the fact that I can do it, and eventually my body is going to follow suit and start to make changes based on those better eating habits. If I'm an emotional eater, I need evidence that says that food isn't really going to fix this problem. And so maybe I get emotional and instead of eating the cake, I eat carrots and make a better choice. And then eventually I say, I'm not hungry, I'm just emotional. And that continuation of that pattern will build evidence that you can be confident in the fact that this new way is actually going to keep you safe. And the thing is, it's not faking it until you make it. I really hate that phrase because we're not faking anything. We're allowing ourselves to continue to make mistakes as we're walking ourselves through the journey of change so that we're not just putting on a mask, but we're actually changing the thought patterns and the behavior. You don't think your way into confidence. You act your way into confidence. And so if the consistent behavior can tell your brain that that thing can be something that you can do instead of your old thing, then the transformation will start to happen because you'll start to instinctually go toward the new thing. Another thing that research shows us is that lasting change requires identity level shifts. It's one thing to say what you want to do, but it's something else to start to actually see the patterns of those things happening. So when we say, I created this temporary goal and then I have this temporary outcome, and we see that things start to actually happen, the identity shifts that happen in those small changes create a sustainable transformation. So stop asking yourself, what do I need to do? And start asking yourself, who do I need to become? Because if you have the goal, the small goal of becoming this thing, then you'll start to develop these stepping stones of transformational behavior so that you can shift into the new identity instead of trying to overhaul yourself into that new identity. So you can say, this is who I want to become, and today this is what I'm going to do to get myself there. And then once that becomes a habit, you can layer things onto it instead of saying, this is who I want to become. What do I need to do? And this is, in order to be that, then I need to do this list of things. That's not really an identity shifting. It's like trying to transform it all at one time, and that usually doesn't work. If we create temporary small steps that are goals toward that change, then you're going to get outcomes that go toward that change. If you create temporary goals that are, here's the thing that I'm going to do, but you don't have your eye focused on that big goal, then the changes probably aren't going to last, because you're going to say, okay, I'm going to exercise more, but like your real goal is to focus on your health more. So maybe exercise more is a shift or a step in that process. But if I'm focusing on the real goal of becoming a healthy person, then that shift doesn't feel temporary. It feels like a stepping stone to get me to that end result. You know, a lot of us assume that we're failing when we fall back into those old patterns. But the truth is, you're experiencing resistance, not failure. You don't have to feel like you're failing just because you are shifting back into the methods that have worked in the past. That's just a part of the human experience. Give yourself some grace when you notice that you start doing it. But the great thing is, self-awareness is something that you should celebrate. If you are aware that you're doing the things again, then at least you have the knowledge and know-how to say, okay, I'm going to pause this. I'm not going to do that anymore. So something that I developed over time was that when I am trying to share my opinions or share my thoughts, and I feel like somebody doesn't see me or hear me, or even maybe they're not even interested in seeing or hearing me, I just completely shut down. Conversation over, not talking anymore. It's not worth it. Because there was a time period in my life where I would just talk and think that change was going to be made. I was going to change that person's mind. I was going to change the situation just by trying to get them to see where I was coming from. And the way to get them to see that was to talk more. Well, that actually has never worked for anybody. It just isn't an effective strategy when you're dealing with people who don't want the change to happen or are very stuck in their ways. And so I determined that if I noticed that a change in the conversation wasn't going to happen, meaning that person wasn't going to be able to hold space for somebody to have a different opinion than them, or I noticed that it was a cyclical conversation, meaning that we just kept saying the same things over and over again, I would just completely shut down. No conversation about it, just be done with it. Like, I'm listening to them, I'm shaking my head, but then I'm like, I'm not talking anymore. And eventually that transitioned into me actually communicating what was happening. So instead of just completely shutting down, I might say something like, I don't really feel like I'm being heard, and I'm not expecting you to agree with me, but I do expect that because we are both human adults, that we're able to hold space for other people to have different emotions than us, or other people to have different insight than us. Just the same way that I hold space for you to not agree with me, I would hope that you could hold space for me to not agree with you. And because I don't feel like that's happening, I'm going to end the conversation here. So I would communicate that. Or I feel like this conversation is going in circles. We just keep saying the same thing. There's not going to be an actual outcome to this conversation. We're just going to keep repeating ourselves in different ways. Like, I can communicate that because I know that shutting down is not a beneficial process when you're having those type of conversations. It's not a way to get to any sort of revelation, and also it kind of shuts the other person down too, which in most cases, when I developed the strategy in the first place, that's exactly what I wanted to do, just end the conversation so they would leave me alone. So recently in a conversation, I found myself doing that. Like, oh, I said it again, now I'm done talking. Like, this person doesn't hear what I'm saying, I'm repeating myself, etc. And when I felt myself shut down, I started listening and just shaking my head, because that's the pattern that I had before. But I know that I want to be better at not shutting down, but communicating what it is that I'm feeling and setting the boundary, saying that I'm not going to have the conversation, but communicating it, not just shutting down and, looking like I'm angry or something, because I'm not. I just feel unheard. So that's what I did. I literally said the words. When I feel like I'm not heard, or I feel like this conversation is going in circles, I just stop talking. And I'm just going to listen to you, because I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I don't agree. So there really isn't a point for me to continue to repeat what I don't agree on, because I've already said it several times. That felt like a big win for me, because in normal pattern, I would have just shut down. So you have to see yourself making that progress toward the goal, But you also have to catch yourself when you fall back into those old patterns. And something that is a revelation to all of us is that you can stop yourself in the process. A lot of times we get into, like, for instance, when you're trying to eat well and you start eating cake. Doesn't mean you have to eat half the cake. You could eat a piece of cake and maybe you ate a second piece of cake and then you're like, oh no, I'm supposed to be eating differently. Not better, I won't use that word, but differently. I'm focusing on different things for myself. And so I'm not going to eat half this cake. I'm just going to stop at this. Like, we can stop in the middle of the behavior that is the old behavior. We can stop in the middle of the thinking that's spiraling into that old behavior. Something that I learned through anxiety was that when I used to have really bad panic attacks, and those have like actually shown up again because it's a pattern of behavior, I used to immediately do a body check. Oh my gosh, this is what's happening. And so I'm hyper vigilant about everything that's going on in my body. And someone once said, you do know that instead of doing that, you could say, here's something that's I can still see. My eyes are still blinking. I'm still breathing. I can still stand. I can focus on the things that your body can do so that your brain focuses on the normalcy instead of the things that you're starting to feel like are abnormal. And when you do that, the anxiety lessens because you don't start to say, oh my gosh, well, this is happening and this is happening. Am I having a heart attack? Am I dying? You say, oh, well, this is still happening and this is still happening. So my body can still do these things. So I must not be, going through what I actually am convincing myself that I am. Another old habit that I have stopped myself right in the middle of to try to change it. So nothing says that if you reach out to that ex that you can't, after you send the first message, say, nope, I said I wasn't going to do this, I'm blocking them again. Nothing says that if you yell at your kids, now you're done and you ruined everything. No, you can actually apologize. Hey, I did that wrong. Can I have a redo? Or like, can we just understand that I know that I did that completely wrong and I'll do it differently next time? You can stop in the middle of it and change the behavior right then. And that's actually a part of the transformation process that will help you to determine that you can count on yourself to do it differently. So what are some practical takeaways that you can do to ensure that you're on this journey, and when you fall back into those old identities, that you can get yourself into a space where you're not doing that as much anymore? Ask yourself, what future version of myself am I wanting to become, and where am I resisting it? So write down the ways that you're currently protecting this old version of you and how that's keeping you from becoming the newer version that you want to be. Because sometimes your biggest obstacle isn't the fear. You're not afraid anymore. It's your addiction to your familiarity. And when you start to say, it doesn't have to feel comfortable to be good for me, then you can start to move into a new space. Because even when we think that it's the failure that we're afraid of, sometimes it's actually our fear of becoming someone new because we're so used to the version of us that we've always been. That old version may not be healthy though. And even though it's predictable, it's not the you that you were destined to be. So notice where you're choosing that familiar over unfamiliar growth, and tell yourself that you want this more than you want the comfort, because growth isn't hard because you're incapable. Growth is hard because your brain loves familiarity. So hopefully this episode was helpful to you. Listen later in the week in the pod or on this channel, not in the pod, but on this channel, where I share with you some practical steps to really solidify this and make it happen. But if this message was impactful to you, please share it with somebody else. Not for me, not for my sake, but for theirs, because I know that the reason I even started this channel in the first place is because I felt like I was on an island, and when I reached out for information, the information that was there had been there for literal decades, and I just didn't give myself access to it. And the more access I had to that valuable information, the more I was able to get myself out of the space that I was in. So thank you for listening. Go to my socials, follow me there, like and subscribe to this channel. And remember that knowledge gained and kept to yourself is selfish, but shared with the world could just be the catalyst for change they need to break free from the bondage that they're in and just to surrender their life over to God. Thank you so much, and I will see you again next time.